Hello everyone, welcome to the discussion on the battle situation. Primorsk port has completely fallen, and Ukraine has just cleared out the entire Russian Baltic port. Ladies and gentlemen, a sea of fire is raging in the Baltic region. But the reason is not because Putin has decided to start a war with the Baltic countries. Not exactly, that's not the case. It was actually Ukraine that just delivered a thunderous blow. And this time the target was a key Russian seaport on the Baltic Sea, which Putin relies on to keep the oil money flowing into his pocket. That seaport has been destroyed. And now Putin has to face the bitter reality that Russia has lost something they can never replace. On the night of March the 23rd, Ukraine once again unleashed its fury with a series of unmanned aerial vehicles directly targeting Russian territory. If you only hear that much, maybe this event isn't enough to become shocking news. Because Ukraine's long-range attack strategy has been established for a long time, another raid doesn't seem too surprising. However, this attack has a completely different tone. The target that Ukraine aimed at on March 23, it is Plymouth, a location in Leningrad Oblast, where the Chasnev oil transit station is located, one of the most important oil export hubs of the Russian Federation. Plymouth is a strategic asset that allows Putin to transport his smuggled oil through Russian fleets to buyers all over the world. And Ukraine has just hit this port with something extremely powerful. So powerful that it forced the entire system to shut down for many days, possibly even weeks to come. We will analyze in more detail the weapon that Ukraine likely used in this latest attack in just a few minutes. But first, let's look at the aftermath of this dramatic strike. In the latest raid targeting Russia's oil and energy export infrastructure, Ukraine precisely targeted fuel storage tanks across the seaport, which are used to store oil products for Russia to export to other countries. Here there are two parallel stories. One is what Russia claims about Ukraine's actions, and the other is what satellite images from Primorsk port are revealing before our eyes. At least this time, the Russian side did not try to use lies to justify being hit. According to the Acha Telegram channel, the governor of Leningrad Oblast, Alexander Grudenko, reported that Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles did indeed hit a fuel tank at Primorsk. Another one, according to Grudenko, was destroyed by air defense forces, although it still caused some damage. The governor of this region stated that one of the drones crashed and damaged a power pole near the village of Yermolovo in the Vybok district. Firefighters are working to extinguish the fire on the dry grass in the field where the drone crashed, and efforts to repel the attack are still ongoing. Well done, Grudenko, we suppose. It seems like you tried to avoid using the ridiculous drone debris excuse Russia often uses whenever Ukraine hits a target. You couldn't fully avoid that explanation either. A crashed drone at least sounds more reasonable than claiming that debris caused a terrible fire. So at least you've made a bit of progress. But was there only one fuel tank? Mr. Grudenko, it seems you've forgotten the fact that satellite imagery always exists, and they reveal much more about what really happened in Plymouth than what you want the world to know. Those photos, shared by Ramifications Press's X account, show that it wasn't just one tank that was destroyed by Ukraine. At least 4 tanks were engulfed in flames after Ukraine's strike. And as the fire continues to rage fiercely in Plymouth, it's entirely possible that more tanks could be burned down. Satellite images reveal that Plymouth's fuel tanks are arranged in pairs. A cluster has been destroyed, indicating 2 tanks were eliminated. In 2 other clusters, we see that each cluster has 1 tank burning. In addition, the thick black smoke from these fires has obscured the view of the other clusters in the image. That means there may have been up to 5 or 6 tanks damaged. This is a huge and extremely painful loss for Russia. Ukraine's attack was big enough to force the staff to flee and to completely shut down a port that is vital to Putin's efforts. This is a key place for Putin to use his shadow fleet to keep the billions of dollars in oil money flowing into the war effort. But before we go deeper into that issue, as we mentioned at the beginning, the attack on Primorsk was very different from most of Ukraine's previous attacks because of the type of weapon they used. We can clearly see this from the fact that Ukraine has attacked Primorsk before. Back in September 2025, Ukraine launched a drone attack on this very port. That attack had a certain impact as part of a massive campaign with 221 drones that Ukraine launched against various areas of Russia, causing a fire on a ship docked at Kymos and at a pumping station in this oil export hub. However, no matter how impressive those results were, they can't compare to the sight of 4 massive fuel tanks being completely burned down like this time. That tells us that Ukraine did not use standard long-range drones for the latest attack on Kymos. They used something very different, a type of weapon called the LOW. It's something between a drone and a missile, which has given Ukraine the ability not only to strike deep into Russian territory, but also to attack more powerfully than ever before. That weapon is the Flamingo. And according to the Telegraph, the significant explosive results we saw on March 23rd show that Ukraine used some kind of missile against Kymos instead of conventional drones. Flamingo is the most promising candidate, and it's easy to see why. Flamingo is exactly what Ukraine's deep strike strategy has been missing for the past few years. With a range of up to 3,000 kilometers and a devastating warhead weighing up to 1,150 kilonewtons, Flamingo can easily deliver 10 times or more firepower compared to a standard long-range drone. This type of weapon is manufactured right in Ukraine, and it provides a perfect alternative to the Western-made Storm Shadow and ATACMS missiles that Ukraine has used in the past. Those Western missiles are limited both in range and by the fact that Ukraine often has to ask the manufacturers for permission before carrying out an attack. Such problems do not exist at all with Flamingo. The fact is that the facility Ukraine just struck is about 1,000 kilometers from the border between Ukraine and Russia. This shows us that Ukraine definitely had to use a weapon that combines long range with tremendous firepower. Flamingo is the leading candidate, as Ukraine seems to have painted Kymos pink with the name of this bird before plunging this port into a sea of fire. In a few minutes, we will explain exactly why Ukraine chose Kymos as its latest target. But before that, you probably already know enough about Ukraine's long-range attacks to guess that Kymos was not the only target hit. And that was also true on March 23rd, when more of Russia's oil and gas infrastructure was set ablaze under the weight of Ukraine's attacks. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed this in a post on Telegram, where they also claimed responsibility for the attack on Kymos. They reported that the Basnev Ufa Neftekim refinery was also hit, and a fire on the premises of this enterprise was confirmed. The Basnev Ufa Neftekim refinery is an extremely important link in supplying fuel to the Russian armed forces. That refinery is located all the way in Ufa, in the Republic of Bashkortostan, a remote distance of up to 1,400 kilometers or nearly 870 miles from the Ukrainian border. Is Flamingo still the culprit behind this attack? If that's true, the Ukrainian General Staff is still keeping all information confidential and has not revealed what specific weapon was used to destroy Kymos. What the General Staff emphasizes is the vital importance. The Ufa plant is responsible for processing 6 to 8 million tons of crude oil each year. Here, crude oil is refined into essential products such as fuel and lubricants, which directly sustain Russia's military machine on the Ukrainian battlefield. Once these refineries are eliminated, it directly destroys the liquid lifeline of Russia's entire war system. And as you will see shortly, that's not the only lifeline that Ukraine has drained from Russia in this drone strike campaign. Another attack still needs mentioning. The Telegraph reported that Ukraine has delivered a powerful blow to the West Teluga export hub, another giant piece in Russia's oil infrastructure. Just like at the Primorsk hub, all operations at West Teluga had to be suspended immediately after the attack. A fire broke out at a facility believed to handle about 700,000 barrels of oil per day. Reuters reported on March 23 that export operations at this Baltic port had begun to resume. However, the situation at Primorsk is completely different. Ukraine has launched a heavy blow, not only targeting Russia's presence in the Baltic Sea, but also directly striking the Shadow Fleet, the main tool that helps fill the Kremlin's coffers with dirty money. As Putin pushes the invasion of Ukraine deeper into its 5th year, What Ukraine has just achieved has exposed one of the biggest vulnerabilities, which may have been underestimated in Russia's entire war machine. The Baltic region means much more to Putin than he dares to admit. Let's look at why Primorsk is so important to Russia's presence and the flow of money to the Kremlin. According to Euromade Quest, Primorsk is a critical bottleneck in Russia's oil export network in the Baltic Sea. It handles about 60 million tons of crude oil each year. The Independent Petroleum Association of America states that 1 ton of foreign crude oil equals 6.99 barrels. Multiply that number by 60 million, and you'll get more than 419 million barrels of oil exported from Primorsk each year. This number will become extremely important when we do some calculations in a moment. But for now, just know that Ukraine has just taken down a seaport that contributes billions of dollars to Putin's war chest, putting it out of commission for many days or even weeks. Ukraine targeting the oil tanks is an extremely smart move. Oil is burning while Primorsk has to shut down, causing Russia to lose huge amounts of money with every passing hour. Primorsk is the center of the entire Russian military, where fuel is stored, refined, and transported for Putin's troops in Ukraine. But perhaps more importantly, Primorsk is the key port for the shadow fleet that Putin has worked hard to build in order to circumvent sanctions from Ukraine's allies. This fleet is enormous, although its secretive nature makes it very difficult to determine the exact scale or the huge amount of money invested in it. According to Sky News, there are up to 800 ships in this shadow fleet, most of which are old, worn-out oil tankers that should have been scrapped years ago. They're still running, despite being outdated and poorly maintained, just so Russia can keep selling oil. The Ukrainian Transport magazine reported that by mid-2025, Russia had spent $14 billion on this fleet, and the current figure is certainly several billion dollars higher, as there is no sign that Russia will stop buying ships. Regarding investment efficiency, Geopolitical Monitor reported that Russia earned an additional $9.4 billion in revenue from the shadow fleet in 2024 alone. If we assume a similar profit level for other years, the Kremlin has recovered its investment many times over. Currently, the shadow fleet accounts for about 89% of Russia's crude oil exports and 70% of its seaborne oil shipments. It seems to have grown even larger than Russia's official oil tanker fleet, and Primorsk is the heart of this entire shadow operation. Every day, the shadow fleet can't operate as Putin intends is a heavy blow to his ambitions. Economist Joe Vovar explains that more than 60% of Russia's oil is exported from just two ports, Primorsk and Ust-Luga. He estimates that each oil tanker entering Primorsk has a capacity of about 120,000 tons. With that enormous size, each ship can transport oil worth between $50 and $60 million. So every day they are delayed in the Baltic is another day the oil money is slow to reach Russia and be taxed by the Kremlin. Note that this is just the figure for each ship, and the closure of Primorsk could lead to dozens of such delays. This will have a devastating negative impact as Putin is trying to push forward the spring offensive, which has already started disastrously in Ukraine. Those failures have caused Russia to suffer the highest number of casualties in a single day since the beginning of 2026. Less money is coming in, less money is being allocated for attacks, and more Russian soldiers are falling. It's a simple but brutal logic. Above all, Ukraine's attack on Primorsk could cause trouble for even more secretive operations that the Shadow Fleet is accused of carrying out in the Baltic Sea. As the number of Shadow Fleet ships increases, reports of fires and damage to infrastructure, energy, and telecommunications under the Baltic Sea have also risen. Russia's Shadow Fleet is not only a threat because it funds the war, but also because of its direct impact on the security of countries that share the Baltic waters, most of which are NATO members. Not to mention the potential environmental disasters when Russia uses dilapidated ships to transport oil. If just one of these 120,000-ton ships has an accident, it could trigger an ecological storm that would devastate the Baltic Sea. Ukraine attacking Primorsk could be a way to turn one of Russia's most important seaports into a hotspot that's too dangerous to maintain. Putin now knows that Ukraine can hit Primorsk. Not just hit it, but strike it with weapons powerful enough to destroy its infrastructure. If these attacks continue, will Russia dare to risk using Primorsk as an oil export hub? They might still do it, but the price to pay will be towering infernos. If Russia withdraws, it will lose its security position and the network built in the Baltic by the Shadow Fleet, dealing a major blow to Putin's ambitions. The Baltic Sea was once expected to be where Putin showcased his power, but now it is becoming the grave for those ambitions. Ironically, this very place has just been exposed as one of Russia's fatal weaknesses. Although we often see Russia trying to create chaos in the Baltic region through hybrid attacks targeting countries like Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, behind that madness, there is always a systematic calculation. The Kremlin wants to create controlled chaos in this region so that they can project their power, as mentioned above. However, when Ukraine strikes and unleashes barrages of missiles, drones, and powerful hybrid monsters on Russia's strategic ports in the Baltic, that control immediately disappears, leaving only chaos in its wake. That's something Putin cannot handle. Russia's military calculations in the Baltic Sea can only go so far before facing retaliation from NATO. And so far, they have been skillfully treading that line. That's also how the Shadow Fleet has been able to operate openly in these waters all this time. Now, just as they have often done in the war with Russia, Ukraine is working to force Putin into making decisions he never wanted to make. Russian assets in the Baltic Sea are becoming targets, and this exposes Moscow's heavy dependence on this particular waterway. That is their Achilles heel. And once again, it all comes down to one thing: cold, ruthless money. Including the Shadow Fleet, Russia earns about $100 billion a year from export activities passing through the Baltic Sea to other countries. According to a report from Ukraine in June 2025, there are up to 100 oil tankers passing through the Baltic Sea each month to deliver Russian oil to Putin's customers. The Baltic Sea is so important that the revenue from exports through this route can rival the total military aid that Western countries provide to Ukraine. Of course, not all of that money goes directly into the Kremlin's pockets, but all of it is taxed by Russia, and that amount adds up to billions of dollars each year, becoming a plentiful source of funding for the war in Ukraine. Earlier, we mentioned doing some calculations based on the capacity of the Primorsk oil port. These numbers will highlight why this port is an economic lifeline for Russia as they wage war against Ukraine. Since the U.S. launched its epic campaign against Iran, the price of a barrel of oil has skyrocketed, often hitting and surpassing the $100 per barrel mark. This is incredibly good news for Putin. Russia has survived by selling its dirty barrels of oil at a steep discount compared to the standard crude oil price. So the higher the global oil price, the more money they make, even after applying that discount. According to Euronews, as of December 2025, Russia has offered a discount of about $25 per barrel of oil. If we apply the same discount in the context of the current oil price being around $100, that means each barrel of Russian oil costs about $75. Now let's recall what we analyzed in the previous section. Euromaidan Press stated that the Primorsk port handles about 60 million tons of crude oil per year, equivalent to 419.4 million barrels, assuming the discounted prices mentioned and in a situation where oil prices do not drop significantly, which is entirely possible if the U.S. prolongs Operation Wrath. Then Primorsk port alone will be responsible for more than $31.4 billion into Russia's economy this year. Such a situation cannot be allowed to persist. Ukraine understands this very well, and that's why they target Primorsk. This port is irreplaceable for Putin, both for its prestige, its power at sea, and the enormous amount of money it generates to fuel the invasion of Ukraine. For Ukraine, wiping out this port right now means cutting off Putin's financial resources. In the future, it also serves as a strong reminder that the war in Ukraine is still raging fiercely, even as the world's attention is being diverted by what the U.S. is doing in Iran. When the unmanned aerial vehicles, most likely the Flamingo hybrids, hit Primorsk, Ukraine has managed to maintain its position on the international agenda on its own. Meanwhile, Putin can only helplessly watch as something irreplaceable is being taken from Russia. And Primorsk is not the only irreplaceable thing that Putin has lost in recent days. Before the attack on Primorsk, Ukraine's aerial vehicles targeted a key base used by Rubicon, Russia's elite drone specialist unit. That base is now gone. Rubicon has been smashed, and Russia has been completely thrown into chaos.